Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's WNBA betting podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marino, back here with Jim Turvey and Joe Dellera. And who better to have for our finals preview episode? If you're a Buckets listener, you remember this trio from our Commissioner's Cup special back at the beginning of the season or earlier in the season. And that was, of course, between the Minnesota Lynx and the New York Liberty, who are both headed to the finals. That was one of my favorite episodes ever of the podcast. And now we reunite here before game one. I think this is probably the best possible matchup that we could have gotten. I mean, the number one and number two teams, I think you could have argued whether, it might have been a better series with Connecticut, but I personally think the Lynx match up a little bit better with the Liberty. But let's start by getting a series best bet and a game one best bet from each of you. Jim, you start.
For my game one best bet, I'm going to go Nafisa Collier under 21.5 points. For my series best bet, I'm going to go New York game one, New York series combo bet at minus 160.
Joe?
I'm going to be on Breanna Stewart over 29.5 points plus rebounds. If that's not available to you, I do like over 9.5 rebounds or double. And for my series bet, I'm on the Liberty minus 1.5 at plus 105. So a little bit we're not paying too much juice here. So it's a little way to maybe escalate Jim's play too.
Okay. We're obviously going to get into the nitty gritty here of this matchup for the series as a whole, as well as in game one. But game one does tip off 8 o'clock Eastern on Thursday on ESPN. The Liberty, I'm seeing a couple of different numbers out there right now, but favored by 5.5, 6, 6.5, depending on where you look. Also seeing a total at 159.5. Now the series odds, we have the Liberty pretty heavily favored, minus 290 or so, whereas the Lynx, you can get them at plus 235. I think probably just to kind of run down some of the biggest factors here heading into this matchup, one has got to be the rest. So Minnesota is on 1 day's rest. I believe they actually traveled to New York Wednesday morning. Cheryl Reeve actually, I had my friend Jackie Powell, who's a beat writer for the Liberty, look for the quote from Cheryl's presser, but she mentioned an 11 a.m. departure, right? So, Tuesday night, they beat Connecticut in this, winner take all game 5. And then the following morning, they're flying to New York and then practicing and meeting with the media in New York. Meanwhile, New York, they played early on Sunday. That was a noon local tip in Vegas. So they probably were home and cozy in bed by like Sunday evening or so. And they have now 3 full days rest. All right. Then you get to the rest of the big picture. So you're going to hear a lot of people talking about the season series. Minnesota was 3-1 straight up and against the spread against New York. Woo, scary. Minnesota, it's October. We're spooky because Minnesota apparently is the only team in the W that won the season series against New York. So, we'll get into a little bit more about the season series and what we may have learned from that. But I guess I'll just start. I'll let you guys get some words in. And Jim, why don't you give me sort of your overarching thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, so I think there is, you kind of jokingly brought up the spooky Lynx. I do think that there is, something to be said for the way the Lynx played the Liberty this series. However, when I zoom out and I'm looking at the series as a whole, I do think the Liberty are A, the stronger team, and B, in a much, much better position to start this series. I do think the rust versus rust thing is always something gets thrown out. But really, this isn't rust for the Liberty. This is just a normal amount of rest. They're going to basically get their 3 comfy days. It's not like they're sitting there for a week and a half. And it is a nightmare travel spot for the Lynx. You talked about them flying in this morning, having to do press. This is on Wednesday. So flying in Wednesday morning, having to do press Wednesday afternoon. They are really not going to be settled. They had to travel twice in that 5-game series. They had to go, they started in Minnesota, flew out to Connecticut, flew out from Connecticut back to Minnesota, and now Minnesota back to the East Coast again. We know that travel to Uncasville in general is not the easiest, so you got that little factor in there as well. it's part of why for my series best bet, I'm bringing in the game one aspect of it, because I think the Liberty are really in a peak position to run away with game one. I'm going to be looking at Lynx player unders, maybe Liberty player overs, especially to start the game, or like, those first quarter, if they hang first half props, because I really do think that there's a potential for this to be a pretty big blowout. We'll talk about how the Lynx stuck around with the Liberty in those games, stuck around and won 3 of the 4 games in a bit, but it relied a lot on shooting, and I think that those legs are just not going to be there for that game one. I don't think it's I'm not going to write them off for the full series, but that game one to me is really, really a bad spot for the Lynx. So I want to leverage that game one in my series cap, which is why I really love the game one and the full series, which I'm leaning Liberty pretty heavily as a whole, and combine the two of them and still get that minus 160 number that isn't terrible right there.
And of course, if you're the home team and you win game one, it exponentially increases your chances of winning the series. And Joe, it kind of just lines up then for you to like the Liberty to, win this series by more than 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of blends into like a corollary with the NBA, right? Because one of the biggest trends in the NBA has been, and granted, the series it's a little bit different in terms of the dynamics because the series are longer. They're 7-game series, but when teams go against another team and and there's like a significant rest advantage where one team played like a game 7, so here a game 5, then they have to go on the road and go play another game where the other team already has the rest advantage. It's a pretty significant disadvantage. And, tying all of the travel things that Jim just mentioned, the rest advantage, I think that it's actually more significant in the W because you only have a 5-game series. So each game is, in theory, it's more, and mathematically it's more valuable. So the fact that we have like this strong of a position and like the highest leverage on game one, where we're saying like this is a huge edge for the New York Liberty in game one, from a travel perspective, from a rest perspective, from a game plan perspective, they have home court, like every single thing points to the Liberty. And being able to say like, okay, we're going to get game one. I struggle then to see from a math perspective, it's a lot harder then for the Lynx to rip off multiple wins in a row in what, even if we think it's a tightly contested series, it could go 4 games and we still win this bet because the Liberty won 3-1. And, maybe the Lynx are able to pick up a game, but this is kind of insulating us from saying like, we're basically just betting that the Liberty win in fewer than 5 games. And when the over under on the series at 4.5 games, the under is minus 200. It's implying from a betting perspective there that like, we're not going to see a 5-game series. So I like to kind of take all of those angles. And I think that the minus 1.5 gives me Liberty sweep, gives me Liberty in 4, and I'm getting a plus number as well. So it's leveraging the game one into a series bet, and that's why I like that for the series.
When I think about this situation that the Liberty were in, I mentioned, fly home Sunday, flying high. They just avenged their finals loss last year. They beat the Aces, and the players can really just rest and focus up. Meanwhile, there were a few days there where then the coaching staff for the Liberty can get to work, right? So you probably have one coach working on the scout for Connecticut, one working on the scout for Minnesota. So they have a head start, right? And not to mention, they're home probably watching game 5 between Minnesota and Connecticut and taking notes and like just getting a better understanding and getting more like mentally prepared, I think, for who they're going to play. Minnesota obviously already knew they were going to have to play New York. So they probably already had a coach kind of working on that. But again, it's just the turnaround and just sort of the refocusing after this emotional game 5. I want to talk about this season series a little bit more because in our Action Slack channel earlier today, Matt Moore, our colleague, was like, all right, so is there like any concern about this, Minnesota winning the season series? That was my not Matt Moore voice, but whatever. And so it got me really looking at it and thinking about it. And Jim, you kind of alluded to this, how have the Liberty sort of better positioned themselves throughout the season? And look, the first matchup was in May, right? So I'm kind of throwing that out the window. The second meeting was the Commissioner's Cup, which we all talked about at length. And important to remember too, that was not a true home game for New York, right? They played in Long Island. Then the third meeting was only a few days later. That was the one meeting that New York won. One thing that I think separates New York from the beginning of the season to now is absolutely the emergence of Leonie Fibish, right? So the first couple of games of the season, she wasn't really a factor. She wasn't getting a lot of burn. In fact, in the Commissioner's Cup, she only played 8 minutes. Now, the following meeting, the one that New York won, Leo played 26 minutes and she was a plus 17. So I think that's really important. And then the most recent matchup here was on September 15th, right? So that is probably the most, comparable matchup. But, Stewie had a huge game. I believe 38 points in that game. She went off. I mean, New York, they got down by as many as 26 and they clawed all the way back. I went back and watched highlights of this game earlier. And what did I notice about the second half? Definitely way more Leo, like just out there guarding, wreaking havoc. And then the other thing I noticed too, this is just a side note, guys. Niara Sabally had 9 points in that game. She was 4 of 5 from the floor in 17 minutes and was a plus 10. I just think that's important to note because she was a DNP in games 2 and 4 versus Las Vegas. So do we see maybe Sabally get some more minutes in this matchup? I think that's something to pay attention to. And then to shout out Matt Moore just once again, we have to talk about the shooting variance. Dun, dun, dun. It's the spooky theme of October, the shooting variance. Everyone gets all, we get all wrapped up about this, but it's really true because, look, Jim Turvey called on our Commissioner's Cup preview. Bridget Carlton, MVP. Should have won. Yeah. Definitely got robbed. That's okay. She was 6 of 8 from 3 in that game. Talked about the September 15th meeting. She was 5 of 7 from 3 in that game, while Sabrina was only 2 of 12 from 3, finished with 13 points. So look, obviously, whoever's shooting the ball well is going to have a massive advantage. I feel like with Minnesota as a whole, whether Bridget Carlton is making shots or not is a huge, huge factor as to whether or not they are converting, a game into a win. And that's where, once again, I come back to Leo. I think it just changes everything because, I mean, hell, I wonder if Sandy's just going to be like, just send her out there and just stick to her. And as long as she doesn't get in foul trouble, it should bode fairly well for New York. So that's how I rationalized this matchup throughout the course of the season and what I think is the key to, this being a different result for New York this time around. So now that I've regurgitated all that information, Jim, would you like to jump in?
No, there's so much good stuff there, and enough. I should have been like jotting down notes to come back, circle back to this, circle back that. I do think though the big thing that jumped out to me was the shooting variance, and you mentioned among like certain key players, but even like at a large scale, the pattern's very clear. I was texting you guys earlier, like it doesn't seem like there's a lot of patterns player prop wise. I was kind of struggling to be like, oh, this person like really, collects a lot of assists or something, blah, blah, blah. The biggest pattern hands down is here's the Minnesota 3-point shooting percentage in their wins. 50%, 50%, 48.3%. Here's the shooting percentage in the one loss, 29.6%. It's like really boring to boil basketball down to who makes the shots. And it's not always that simple, but I do think with a team like Minnesota, who is so reliant on making their threes on the offensive side of things, and they reliant, but also just successful. They did it better than, anyone in the league this year. But, and on the other side, they are one of the best 3-point defenses. So for them, it really does come down to the variance. It's what Matt Moore said when we were talking about the playoff preview in general. Like, can they maintain the variance? And they've been able to at times. It's why I think that, something like playing Liberty sweep is a little bit sketchy. I get scared that they will have good shooting games in here. But when I look at those three numbers in the wins, 50%, 50%, 48.3%, those aren't sustainable numbers. Even if the Lynx are one of the best 3-point shooting teams, it's going to be like 10, at least 10, maybe 15% lower than that. It's before you get into, this is a finals environment that is going to be an absolute cauldron. Barclays has been amazing all, this entire run of the Liberty the last 2 years. Barclays has been such a great place for them to play outside of Game 4 of last year's finals. But this really, I do think that, if the Lynx come in and shoot 50% from three on, 20 plus attempts in 3 games, I'm going to tip my cap and say, you know what?
Yeah.
That this team was magical. They were destined to win this title. But to me, that is not the statistically likely thing to happen. And it is an overarching, kind of guide in that I don't see that series, the series summary for the season, if you will, being supremely relevant, because we're looking at a little bit of outlier performances before you even get to the Phoebish of it all and how she, her role has built and built and built throughout the season. So I'm pretty much in lockstep with how you laid it out in terms of, we want to dig in, we want to look at that season series, but we don't want to be overwhelmed and assume that it is, that's the standard. It's more, let's see what actually happened. And for me, it was not enough to scare me off of being on the Liberty side of these finals.
I need to correct you, Jim. Game 4 was in fact electric, as you texted me when you walked into the building. The Liberty just couldn't finish the job. Because...
Yes, that's true. No, you're right. It was absolutely electric. It just had a spooky ghost. October again. It definitely was haunted that night with that loss.
It's the theme, and hopefully, New York will not be haunted once again. But here's why I think that I'm less afraid of that, and it's another thing we discussed earlier. And Joe, I'm coming to you because I feel like you probably agree with me on this angle, but there was some talk about, okay, once you beat Vegas, right? That's been the team to beat. That's sort of the team that you were built and assembled to beat. Is this a potential for a letdown spot for New York? So actually, the fact that New York has lost the season series with Minnesota and they robbed them of $500,000 prize money in the Commissioner's Cup, I almost feel like that actually serves kind of, if you like the Liberty side, it serves you even more here, because there's just this added motivation that I don't think that they would have against any other team. And let's not forget, last year, New York won the Commissioner's Cup and Las Vegas got the last laugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely gives a little bit of motivation. I think that honestly, this whole season has felt like a little bit of a revenge tour for the Liberty. They could have won last year, honestly. They could have beat the Aces, and it just didn't happen. And then this year, you add Phoebich, so that is definitely helpful. That's a piece. And when you look at what they've done, they've just really kept their foot on the gas. And to me, it felt like when they did drop the one game to the Aces, that seemed like the wake up call. Hey, lock in. You got to be paying attention, because you're gonna lose. And given the fact that they did have a poor history this season against the Lynx, I think that it's good film too. It's something that they can look at and say hey, we can actually improve on these things. This is why we lost these games. And there's an actual tape review type of thing that you can look at. Some of it, like Jim said, I think is shooting variance. And I think that matters. I also do think that, though, in the Commissioner's Cup game, because you could say the regular season, you don't usually get out of your rhythm, you don't get out of your sets, you're not doing anything super nuanced. Commissioner's Cup game, maybe you were trying to do that a little bit. I mean, the Lynx shot 50%, and the Liberty turned the ball over 20 times. So that's that, and they only lost by a couple points. So it's that's the swing there. So it's the Lynx had to play basically an A+ game, and the Liberty played I think you could honestly say they played a bad game. They played a sloppy game, and they still almost won the game. So that, I think, is a little bit of what it is. But then also for the Liberty, when you look at this game, or this series in particular, right? We started to see them deploy different things against the Aces too. It's we saw in Game 4, Stewie was like covering guards. Like they put her on plum. Like there are so many things that New York can do to really like lock down, I think, they can lock down Minnesota's offense, because I don't know if their defense is maybe as good as Connecticut's. Connecticut's is always looked at as like one of the top defenses in the league, but so is New York's. But from an offensive perspective, when Connecticut like was locking down Minnesota, like they could not get out on a run. Like it was like pulling teeth to score buckets, right? The Liberty, that's not what's going to happen. Like the Liberty can put up points, and it's like, I know that the Lynx's defense is strong, but I think that the margins are a lot more narrow for Minnesota. And like if you are relying to a degree on 3-point shooting variance, that is a very tough scenario. Like you're really climbing an uphill battle there, especially against a team like New York that doesn't shy away from shooting 3-pointers.
I think the personnel matchups here are really fascinating because New York has a clear size advantage, especially with Jonquel Jones sort of protecting the paint. But I think when watching back again some of the film from the season, the quickness of like an Alana Smith or Nafisa Collier even can be a counter to that. But at the same time, with Stewie able to guard a variety of positions, and then, you throw in Phoebish. Also, I think hopefully Benajelani Hamilton is healthier. She definitely showed some signs in the last series of like still not quite being herself, but at least was able to, at times anyway, bring energy on the defensive end. I thought her defensive energy was way better at home than it was on the road. But Joe, I'm really glad that you brought up sort of the fact that New York has all this tape, right? And knows sort of what not to do. That's something that Sabrina referenced after the ugly, what was it, game 3 when New York got blown out in Vegas. Her approach to it, like when she spoke to the media after the game, was basically like, this is like spinning it positive, almost just being like, all right, now we know exactly what they are going to throw at us and how to counter it. But what I also find fascinating, if you listen to those comments, she described Vegas's defense as Minnesota-esque. So, I mean, that's a little bit, does that mean that that's kind of what she's expecting, from Minnesota as well? So, just a couple other random thoughts. Do you guys want to get into Breanna Stewart now, or do you want to go in another direction? You tell me, Jim. What do you want to do?
I definitely think we should go Stewie, and I kind of want to kick it to Joe, because Joe and I, in the kind of the lead up to this, Joe keeps being like, "Yeah, this is Stewie series. This is Stewie series," and I'm like it might be, but like I think I have come around to where Joe is. So Joe, since you were on this corner before me, do you want to walk through some of the ways to bet Stewie?
I mean, my big thing was, and like I was texting Jim like before the semifinals, and I was like,
I thought you were going to say, hold on, I thought you were going to say before the sunrise, because
well, that's true too.
But
apparently the way that Joe apparently wakes up like early in the morning and like first thing is text Jim Turvey about.
Well, Joe doesn't sleep. I'll get texts from Joe after I went to bed and before I woke up. I was like, when does this dude sleep?
Yeah,
he doesn't. That's the secret.
Energy.
He doesn't. That's why he's
dad energy. Yeah.
Always cooking.
But like,
anyway.
No, but I was texting Jim before the semifinals, because I was like, I think the Liberty are going to beat the Aces. And like, should we be betting on Stewie? Because I think that Stewie has a good matchup against the Lynx, and I think the Lynx beat the Sun. And Jim was like, what is wrong with you? Like, this is way too early, man. Like, you're doing too much. But part of it was like, I was crunching some of the numbers, right? And like this season, Stewie has like absolutely crushed in this matchup. She's averaging like almost 25 points a game, 14 rebounds a game, and 3 assists a game across the 4 matchups against the Lynx. So there's a little bit of variance there. Like there's been a couple games where she like blew up, like had it and a little bit of it was in a blowout. So there's a little bit of, you can take those stats with like a little bit of a grain of salt, but to me, like those numbers are massive. And when we look at what Minnesota kind of brings to the table, is like they're a bad rebounding team. Like they're just a straight up bad rebounding team. Stewie's a good rebounder, surprise, and she's like, that's something that she's been able to do successfully in this matchup. So when I'm looking at it from that perspective, I think that it's going to be a little bit. It's hard to cover her. I'd imagine that they're going to put fee on her to a degree, but it's also like that's a big roll of the dice if you're Minnesota. Like I know you kind of have to, but like if she gets in foul trouble, you're gonna have a lot of difficulty not only on offense but also on defense. So I question to see like just how much of that there is. And then also like if Stewie is in some cross matchups where she's covering guards, where, you know, she's maybe not covering Fee, maybe she's covering like Alana Smith, like whatever it is, I could see that helping her in transition where she's able to slip out. She's in a mismatch in transition in the half court, and then you just immediately give her the ball. And, you know, you're really able to capitalize on that. So I think it's a really good opportunity for Stewie. I like the fact that she can really score just in pretty much any way on this team. And I like the fact that obviously she's going to be able to get some rebounds. She's going to probably get some second chance opportunities. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Liberty try to push that button and say like, hey, like we're going to run the offense through Stewie until you show us that you can stop her. Because like Minnesota has seemed pretty comfortable this season defending Sab, and like they seem fine with what they're doing. Like she's not had like really a ton of good games against them this season. So to me, I think Stewart has to be the engine of the Liberty's offense and really the engine of the team. So I like her for game one. I like over 29.5 points plus rebounds. And I also like her for the series to lead the series in scoring at plus 250. I just think that number is a little bit out of whack, especially when you consider the fact that Jim's other best bet is Nafisa Collier's under. So I think that these do tie in pretty well together.
Okay, along those lines, first of all, I have felt all year long that there's a clear benefit for the Liberty when Breanna Stewart is being aggressive and she's not waiting. This is what happened in the Commissioner's Cup. The first half, she didn't do shit. And then the second half, she came out guns blazing, and that's why they had a chance to win at the end. And also at the September 15th matchup, same thing. Second half, she went off. I mean, she was probably, she scored 38 points. So I'm sure she scored a little bit in the first half, but it was really the second half urgency. And that's how New York won game one against Vegas as well. She got going right away. So I think that's going to be like a directive because that it works, because then you can play inside out and then things start opening up for Sabrina and everything else. You talked about Nafisa. What I find interesting, and tell me if you guys have experienced anything else, like Nafisa is a very impressive defender because I don't remember her ever getting in foul trouble. Like she's just so like, I don't know. She's as smooth as she is on offense is how she is on defense. Like I'm worried more about, to me, the Liberty's issues typically stem from when either Jonquel Jones or Leonie Phoebish get into foul trouble. So those are, I think that's going to be, they're going to both have to be extremely disciplined because that almost bit them in the game 4 against Vegas. They worked through it, but that was a touchy like time. Like that was touch and go, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Right. Like, and I give a lot of credit to Sandy for navigating that foul trouble in that game. So there's that, but I guess,
can I hop in there for a second to stay on Fee for a second? Cause I feel like this has been we've talked a lot about the Liberty on this podcast so far. I think it's because all three of us are on that side, but I do think it's a few things worth pointing out here. I think one that's worth pointing out, not really a bidding angle per se, but I think to me it has become very clear throughout the season that we kind of came into the season in my mind with a big two of Stewie and Asia were in their own tier above the rest of the league. I think it's pretty clearly a big three right now, and that Nafisa Collier is in that tier with the best players in the league. It's not a coincidence that the Lynx are in here. We always think of the Lynx maybe as like this team with great depth. They are that, but they also have a top tier player in Nafisa Collier who has arrived in this season and really said, like, I'm one of the, and like saying one of the three best, honestly, I really do think of those three as like pretty interchangeably the best players in the league. And it wouldn't be shocking if I think the Lynx are a, deserving underdog, but it wouldn't be cataclysmically shocking if the Lynx go in, she wins finals MVP. She continues the insane run she's been on this postseason. She is playing outstanding basketball and is in that top tier. The other thing I'll say to that, she's basically baked in as if the Lynx win the series, she is winning MVP. I think that because everything I just said is true. However, because of the point that we talked about earlier, is the shooting variance is the way the Lynx win the title. In my mind, is if they go out and have 3 games where they shoot 50% from 3 and make a dozen threes, something like that. I think the player that, if you want to be on the Minnesota side of things, and if you want to have a nice little long shot, I think Kayla McBride at 50-1 for Finals MVP. If you want to be on the Minnesota side of it, she could very easily go out and score 20 a game. She could be the one hitting those threes. She's gotten up a lot of attempts against the Liberty throughout the season. She's going to have tough matchups. But say Benijah starts on her, and Benijah is a little hampered right now. She gets off to a good start there. K-Mac was racking up assists in the most recent series against the Sun. If she averages 20 and 6, and I'm kind of on, Nafisa Collier's points unders, in part because she has a tough matchup in Stewie, those two kind of cancel each other out. And K-Mac and, beyond the arc is what's leading the Lynx to a title. I think that there is not the correct amount baked into a series script that would lean towards the Lynx that goes with Kayla McBride and bombing from 3. And that's the way that they win this.
Fascinating. I love a good long shot from Jim. And I don't know if this is the time, but whatever. Let's get into Finals MVP a little bit. Because there is like another legit long shot that you like.
There is another long shot. I'll go back to the New York side. This will, you reference Commissioner's Cup. This is a throwback to last year's Commissioner's Cup at this same number. Jonquel Jones, 34-1 plus 3,400. So she has the great stat that came out today. She has the most playoff games without a ring. She has been in the finals 2019, 2022, 2023, and she has excelled in the finals. We saw it last year. She was the Liberty's best player in the finals. She averages about 18 points a game across those many, I think like 14 finals games at this point. The Lynx, Joe, you touched on this. They are not a good rebounding team. Jonquel Jones can absolutely eat them on the glass. If she's going for 18 and 14 a game, and Stewie and Fee are kind of, two of the best defensive players canceling each other out. We talked about how the Lynx have done a pretty good job on Breanna. I think that this Jonquel number is just a little bit too long again. So, a sprinkle on the K-Mac, a sprinkle on the Jonquel. These are long shots. I have one other fun long shot as well, actually, that's not related to Finals MVP. You want me to save that for later or throw it out there now?
Just one moment. I just want to respond to one thing that you said. Somebody else in this series has played in a couple of finals without winning, and that's Courtney Williams.
Yep.
And she was with Connecticut as well. So I'm not going to go ahead. I don't even know what she is for Finals MVP. I'm not going there. But I do want to mention that we need to find out if Mr. Williams.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say.
Because so if you watch the semis, you understood, and I've seen this before. It's all coming back. I've seen this movie before. Whenever she plays and her dad's there, I feel like ESPN makes a point of they show him Holly Rose cutting it up with him. And she plays better when he's there. She struggled a little bit at the beginning of the semis, and then her breakout game, he was there. And so something to keep an eye on, maybe even for some live betting if you see he's in the house. I just wanted to throw
what about Courtney Williams and Spike Lee to jaw at each other minus 10,000?
Perfect.
Oh my God.
Perfect.
I hope Spike is out in full force.
Oh, he will be. And Courtney will definitely chirp to him. So
maybe we'll get another Mello sighting.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anybody who's anybody is going to be at the game. What else do we have to discuss here? Hold on. I do want to circle back to Stewie really quick, just because we heard her after the semis, after they beat Vegas. I thought probably the most poignant thing that she said was I kept receipts from last year. So even though Vegas is knocked out, I still think that Stewie feels just a different level of ownership after understanding that her percentages, her shooting percentages last postseason were uncharacteristically low. She got the ball with a few seconds left and didn't do anything with it when Vegas ended up winning their second championship in a row. And so I still think there's that urgency from her, that urgency to prove that she is still one of the best, and to really finish the job. And so in that way, I do like that, just in terms of everything that Joe was discussing with just liking this series for Stewie.
So Maria, can you like tee me up perfectly? Can I interest you in a little Stewie to score 43 points? Now, yeah, record breaking, but she had 38 against the Lynx this year. She is keeping receipts. This is, the biggest stage, plus 3,400 as well on that as a really, really nice little long shot. Are you
I'm down.
interested? Yeah, Joe's already betting it as I like say the words. Maria, are you
right here? Like,
I mean, what did you say the odds were?
34-1 as well.
I mean, it can't hurt a sprinkle. Whatever. I mean, look,
I've spent money on worse things.
Vibes are immaculate. And I do think for whatever it's worth, with the rest spot, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Stewie goes off game one, like I said, like she did game one of last series. But I was also encouraged, just to talk about Breanna for a second here, because we haven't really, even though she had the rough game 3 against Vegas, like the other bet that I was like so proud of when we did our Commissioner's Cup was she went over 6.5 first quarter points. And she's been too, very aggressive. And also just I think the thing that's different from last year to this year is because she now has a better ability to attack the basket, it gives her the ability to take over games. So I think she's going to end up having to play that role again. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, even though, I do think Stewie's kind of the, if Stewie's not herself, it's just going to change everything. But, they're all really important, but I definitely think that big three, Breanna, JJ, Stewie, that's everything. But yeah, Jim's going under on fee. So that's all I need to know for game one. What else? What else do we need? What else do we need to hit? I think that's pretty much. I think that's pretty much everything. Is there anything we're missing, Joe?
No, I mean, I do feel like I just feel like it's going to be a great series, honestly. And like, there's more eyeballs on the W this year. And like, I think that this is going to be a really good opportunity to say, like, like we're going to have either like Fee complete this like insane run through the finals, through the playoffs, or you're going to have the Liberty win their first chip. And I think that that's like really interesting. I think that it's like fascinating because it's just like another accolade for Stewie. If it goes the Liberty's way, Sab gets her first one, John Quell gets a ring. Like I think there's like a lot of like underlying narratives here, and like the Lynx are like a pretty like storied W franchise too, so it's like it's a big deal for Fee. It's a big deal for that franchise who had like pretty long odds going into the season. Like I think everybody for the most part thought it was just going to be Aces Libs, and we're in the situation here. So it's a really big opportunity. I think it's a really big finals, and I think we're going to be set for a pretty competitive series that is going to have a lot of compelling games.
Yeah, actually, to that point, one thing in the market, I think it's kind of crazy that they have the exact price, the exact outcome where it's like Liberty 3-0, Liberty 3-1, Liberty 3-2, Lynx 3-2, blah 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 down the line. The shortest is right now priced is Liberty to sweep. I don't think that's accurate. I think between the fact that these are two very good teams and the variance part of it, I think that's really mispriced. So one of the things I kind of am intrigued by, Brian Fonseca likes this one. I know is Liberty 3-1 exact at plus 320. that seems pretty interesting. It still gets Joe's -1.5, which I do think the Liberty are the side you want to be on. You could even look at like a New York, Minnesota, New York exact. That's exactly how the last series for New York played out.
Mhm.
That's at +700 as well. So I do think that this is going to be. I think the Liberty are the right side to be on. We laid out many of the reasons why, but I don't think this is going to be a walkover. I don't see a sweep here. Maybe they go cold, and anything can happen. But these are two very, very deserving teams, the two best teams for the season. Like the Aces just weren't the second best team this season. So, it is a bummer to an extent that we didn't get the rematch in the finals just because of the growing rivalry here. But these are the two most deserving teams in the WNBA this season. And it's awesome. Like Joe laid out really well some of those really cool storylines. And one more is just, we have the two best teams in the WNBA playing in the finals. It doesn't always happen. It's a great thing to see.
You guys, that was such a good summation. But no, for real, like I think there's a thought that like maybe the Lynx are ahead of schedule, but they're not really when you look at Nafisa Collier, because she's been building to this. I mean, I know she had a baby like 2 years ago or whatever it was. So like that might have put a slight little delay in her ascension, but like she's been building to this, and Alana Smith and Courtney Williams were picked up in free agency and like nobody talked about it. And those are really big pickups. So it was clear from the start of the season that Minnesota they were going to be a contender. And here they are. And I agree with you, Jim. I don't think this is going to be easy at all for New York. This is not a given by any means. So, all right. This, of course, was a freaking blast. We're going to be back Friday to preview game 2. So we'll have a whole lot more to dissect. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Buckets. Thank you, Joe Delara. Thank you, Jim Turvey, for hanging out. Always great to have you guys on. Hold. I just need to say, let's get buckets.